Namaskar and welcome to episode number 10 of Pustakalya Wala Podcast, where we have been covering the electromagnetic field theory of consciousness, book by book by Susan Pockett. And this book is called Nature of Consciousness, but I am going to set this book aside because I got sidetracked by a lot of interesting work done by Anil Seth in the University of Sussex. There is so much more information about consciousness now than it was available 10-15 years ago. Study of perception in consciousness has taken a new life. There is a new open access journal that I came across called Neuroscience of Consciousness from Oxford University Press. This is on Anil Seth's website, anilseth.com. He's a professor of cognitive and computational neuroscience. I've already talked about him on the podcast. He works at the University of Sussex. He's a co-director of Slacker Center of Consciousness Studies and a lot of other things. And he has a lot of interesting talks on YouTube. And there is a podcast with Anil Seth, podcast with Sam Harris on his Waking Up, Making Sense podcast now, name changed, which is extremely interesting because Sam Harris comes to it from, he's also a neuroscientist, but he also comes from it from the contemplative side, the side of a meditator, whose work has really influenced my thinking and my understanding and the way I think of consciousness and my own consciousness. And actually, his work has actually inspired me to do this, what I'm doing right now, just to understand this whole field. And this episode is like a pivot into a new direction of what I want to study, because I realize that a study of consciousness is the thing that is most how do you state it, most in my personal view, it's most poised to have a change in society, the next big change in society that might happen, and that is required from my point of view, can come out of this research. First of all, why do I think so? Well, first of all, we are politically in a state which is not very stable. Let's say we are still a part of history. Things are changing. The world is moving towards more right-wing politics all over the world, which wouldn't be as bad if there were more discussion going on, and the discussion on politics was more fluent and more easy, and it was easy to change minds. And that is not happening because of these sections that have been made online, where people don't really talk to each other anymore and discuss, because of this central problem that people take the worst possible meaning and intention behind other person's words, instead of taking a charitable view of what they mean and what they're saying and why they're saying that, and why do you think what they're saying is racist. Maybe they're not really racist. Maybe they have concern of the culture and society because they came across something which you haven't come across. Steel manning rather than straw manning. And how do we do that? I mean, we have to first of all talk about it, but I think it's an engineering problem in some ways. You can come across it from the engineering side. Maybe it's just to do with the way we are interacting online through text. And right now we don't have any alternative. The text, small text, is the only way. But the problem with text is there is so much information in text. How does all that relate to what I'm saying, what I'm doing here? I think if we can understand how to communicate better in some better way through virtual reality, through understanding what connects people, understanding how people see the best in other people, all those things kind of relate to the problem. This study of consciousness and psychedelics in the field. So let me. So I can continue on this topic for a long time, but I'll stop here and go back to the topic of this podcast, which is the study of consciousness through studying these papers that are printed, that are published in this open access journal called Neuroscience of Consciousness from Oxford University Press, and the work done by Anil Seth and other people, his colleagues and people in other universities who are trying to understand what consciousness is made of and how psychedelics are becoming a big part of study of consciousness. So without further preamble, let's get into the first paper that I came across, which got my fancy. It's called Dimensions of Consciousness and Dimensions of Consciousness and the Psychedelic State by Tim Bain and Olivia Carter. This is published in Neuroscience of Consciousness in July 2018. And the abstract and the understanding is this paper is about the claim that the question of what does it mean for the psychedelic state of consciousness to be higher? Is it really a higher state of consciousness? Or is it just a different state of consciousness? To say that it's a higher state of consciousness is most likely a misnomer. And this paper kind of explains. I'll go through this paper. I haven't gone through this paper completely. I have gone through a little bit. And what I like about it, the first thing that I really liked about it is it's stating of... It's actually... This paper is not research paper. It's more of a review paper. It's reviewing a lot of research in this field and giving a new understanding of kind of like collecting all the new things that we learned and what does that mean, and trying to understand what does all that mean. So they are taking a lot of research data from studies on psilocybin and LSD. And the first thing that they say about the states of consciousness, first of all, we have already discussed this. There are two different aspects of consciousness: the state of consciousness and the contents of consciousness. States of consciousness used to be called levels of consciousness, different levels of consciousness, but it has been changed from that to states of consciousness, because levels of consciousness kind of gives an impression that it's a one-dimensional scale, where if we are comparing two levels of consciousness, one of them has to be bigger than the other one, must be higher than the other one, which is usually not the case, because psychedelics, if had you removed psychedelics from the picture, you could say that, yeah, okay, we have these deep sleep, and then the light sleep, and then just drowsiness, maybe anesthesia is one of them, and then maybe highly active state, fully awake. You could potentially put this in a one-dimensional scale, but when the question of psychedelics comes in, you cannot put it into this one-dimensional state. You cannot say that it's higher than normal state, because some part of the consciousness actually gets some abilities get removed. Some capacities get removed in a person's mind. So the whole community decided that, okay, let's not call it the levels of consciousness, we'll call it the states of consciousness, because then it has a multi-dimensional structure where we can discuss a different way to be conscious, which is not lying on this one-dimensional scale. I'm gonna cut this short. It's not short, it's actually already 10 minutes, but I'm going to only discuss this much today, because I am really going to get my bearings again. Earlier I had a book to follow. Now I have different papers to follow, and papers are dense, and papers dense as in full of information, because they are research papers. They are not for layman consumption. And sad to say, I am a layman in this field, and it's not sad, but unfortunately, I am a layman in this field, and we will figure out how to go about it today and tomorrow. So I will be back tomorrow with something new, something interesting, something exciting, something latest, and we'll discuss a little bit. We'll touch a little bit more on why I left the EM field theory, why it no longer made me feel that it's a valid. Short answer is, I feel that it's a little premature, because we are trying to segregate two different types of theories. One is psychoneural theory of consciousness, the other one is EM field theory, and I don't think that we are ready to do that yet, because we don't know enough about it, and there is no research that is possible which will differentiate between the two, because we can't even tell we cannot even tell you if bugs are conscious. Most people think that mice are conscious, cats are conscious, but are bugs conscious? Is a fly conscious? Is it something to be a fly? It's not really clear, and that's why that's a little premature research to think about that in current scenario. Might not be fruitful. Not that it's not bad science, it's still extremely interesting, but I found something more interesting and more pertaining to what I want to do, and I think this is something that I really feel needs to get more attention. And if I can be even a little bit useful to this whole field and process, I'll be really fortunate. I'll feel really fortunate, and this is my way of trying to see if I can be that. I can do that. If I can, it'll be fabulously, fantastically exciting. So see you tomorrow.